So recently I went down the rabbit hole of building my own custom mechanical keyboard. I had a lot of fun doing it, and I recorded pretty much all of the construction process, and I did a ton of sound tests, so I just wanted to document the process, but it also will serve as hopefully a helpful video for you if you're ever interested in building your own keyboard or building this specific board out. So I used a LTC Nimbleback. It's a 68 key, 65% keyboard. I really like that it had the arrow keys exploded out. They weren't crammed up next to the other keys, the alphanumeric keys, like most boards do. It was also $50 on Amazon with stock switches in it. I think you can choose between red, brown, and blue. I went with the red linears. And an advantage of having stock switches come with the board is that I could test out my lubing on it because I'd never done it before. And I wanted to have some switches that I wouldn't mind messing up or having to, move on from eventually. So yeah, I went with that for the board. And then the keycaps I got from KBD Fans. They're a uniform profile, which is what I wanted. And they were blue, which I wanted to incorporate that accented blue color. I picked up some Krytox 205 grade 0 for the lubrication process, and I got a small lube kit from Amazon that was about $15 that included tweezers, a switch opener, some brushes, and a lubing station that can fit 30 switches. In total, this project cost me around $120, so it definitely fits in that beginner build entry-level board price range. But if you want to expand up and get different switches or upgrade any individual part of the board, you can definitely do that and still not break the bank. So with all that out of the way, let's get into the build. The lubing process definitely took the longest out of any part of this process. It's really tedious, but it's totally worth it in the end. I started out with just doing 4 switches to make sure that I liked how they felt, how they sounded, and then I did 2 batches of 30 to complete the rest of the keys. It took me a really long time. It took me 2 Braves postseason games to finish all of these switches, but they ended up pretty good, and I was pretty happy with the feel and the sound of them. If I were to do this again, I would probably buy a jeweler's tool that holds the stems easier than the tweezers that I was using, because that was pretty painful on the hand after squeezing really tightly to hold the stem in place while you painted the lube on. I used Krytox 205 grade 0 based off of recommendations, and it worked out great. Disassembling this board is really simple. There's screws that hold the plate to the PCB, and then there's screws underneath the PCB that hold the PCB to the plate. But it's simple to pop it open and disconnect the PCB from the USB-C port, and then you're home free, and you can get into the stabilizers by removing the PCB from the plate. So for the Band-Aid mod, I just picked up some cloth Band-Aids from Walmart and made sure I cut them to the length of the stems themselves to make sure that they cover the entire surface area of where the stem contacts the PCB. A quick tip here is definitely cut them after you've peeled the paper back, because I could not for the life of me remove the paper after I cut the tiny little rectangles. So yeah, do it like this, where you just kind of peel it back and cut them to length and apply them to the PCB. So these stabilizers that came with this kit, they did come factory lubed, so there was some residual lube on the PCB itself, and you can see me wiping off that lube with a paper towel just to make sure that the Band-Aid would stick properly to the PCB. This is really just a half Band-Aid mod. Usually you would put lube on the Band-Aids themselves to help dampen that sound, but I just wanted to see what it sounded like with just the Band-Aids for now. Like I said, the stabilizers came factory lubed, and I guess the proper way to do it would probably be to wash off the lube with soap before clipping the stabilizers, but I did not do that. It was definitely pretty difficult to do that, but it ended up being okay and worked out in the end. I made sure to take a picture of the stabilizers and how they were mounted on the plate so that I remembered how they would go back in on reassembly. I'm not super familiar with how they worked before I popped this guy open, so it was good that I had that picture. So for foam modding, I used the foam that came with the keycaps from KBD fans, and I just pressed it on top of the stems there that stick up for the screw mounts, and I cut a small slit on the right side for the cable to go through so that the foam would sit flat enough in the board to where you could close it. It's definitely still a tight fit. The screws definitely hold it in place. You can kind of see it popping back up, but it worked out in the end. It sounds good, and I was pretty happy with how it worked out. I checked here to make sure that the board still lit up when I plugged it in to make sure the connection between the port and the PCB was all squared off. I went ahead and tested the stabilizers before I did final reassembly just to make sure that they sounded good and that I hadn't pretty much ruined the lube that had come with it, because a lot did come off on my hands when I was clipping the stabilizers. So I just wanted to make sure with the switches that everything sounded good, felt good before moving forward, because it's definitely tedious to have to go back and open everything back up and fix what you've done. You'll hear in the sound test that backspace is probably the best sounding stabilized key on this board. It's just great. Then it's just a matter of reassembling all of the switches in their spots and all the keycaps on top of them. If you can find which keycaps I put on upside down in this, you get extra points. One of my favorite features of this board is definitely the skirt that makes it a floating mount, or this kind of like inset mount. I really love that option, and I love the way it looks after it's fully reassembled. I did one last test to make sure all the keys were functioning properly and that I hadn't bent any pins or put any switches in improperly. I just opened up a Word doc and tested out all the keys, a bunch of shortcuts, and everything I could really think of. And that's the completed build for now. I have plenty of plans to modify it in the future with different mods to see how it makes it sound different or feel different. But for now, it's a completed project. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. Thanks for watching and enjoy the sound test.